Good evening, dear listener, and welcome to Holiday History. Tonight, the night is hushed and waiting, the kind of night when the world feels suspended between wakefulness and dreams. The candles burn low, their light trembling against the glass, and the wind outside carries the scent of wood smoke and fallen leaves. In olden times, nights like these were made for storytelling. Before there were screens and streetlights, families would gather by the hearth, children wrapped in blankets, elders with tea or cider in hand. And when the last log on the fire began to glow, someone would begin to speak. Ghost tales were not always meant to frighten. Many were stories of remembrance, of love that lingers, of kindness that outlives the body, of spirits that return not to haunt, but to remind. They were the echoes of lives once lived, whispers of history that refuse to fade. Tonight, as the October wind curls around our windows, we'll rekindle that old tradition. Together, we'll travel through centuries and across continents, visiting quiet places where the veil between past and present feels thin as candle smoke. You'll hear of the weaver who waited on the moor for her love to return, of a violinist whose music refused to die, of candles that burned for souls at rest, and of libraries that still whisper after midnight. Each tale will unfold gently, like the turning of an old book's pages. Stories once told by candlelight, meant to warm even as they wander through the shadows. So, pull your blanket close, let your mind rest. Wherever you are in the world tonight, you're part of an ancient tradition, listening to ghost stories as the night grows still. Now, take a deep breath and let the flicker of the flame guide your imagination. Our first story begins far away, in the mist-covered hills of northern England, where a lonely cottage stands among the heather, and a single window glows against the dark. Tale 1, The Weaver of the Moor. When autumn folds its arms around the northern hills of England, the moor turns the colour of rust and smoke. The daylight shortens until it feels rationed, and a thin white frost powders every stone wall. Travellers passing through that quiet country often speak of a single glow on those dark evenings, a lamp that burns from a cottage window where no road should be. The people of the nearby village know the story. They say it belongs to Eleanor Weaver, the woman who once spun wool in that cottage, and perhaps still does. The weaver. Eleanor had lived there since her youth. Her loom sat before the west-facing window, so the last trace of sunset fell across her threads. Her hands were quick and strong. She could turn a fleece into cloth softer than breath. Locals swore her blankets carried warmth far beyond the fire that wove them. She never argued. She only smiled and murmured that every pattern held a blessing. One for safe travels, one for steady hearts, one for the comfort of those who kept watch alone. Her husband Thomas had been a shepherd, who knew the moor as other men know their gardens. He would whistle his way through fog thick enough to erase the world. One October, a storm rolled in from the sea, bringing 3 days of white blindness. When it cleared, the flock returned without him. The moor kept its secret. Eleanor waited. She hung his cloak by the door and lit the lamp each dusk, so that, should he wander home, he would see the glow. Weeks became months, years. Still the lamp burned. It came to be said that Eleanor wove by its light, and that its flame learned her patience. The Night of the Fog. Long after her time, when carts had iron rims and coaches took the place of saddles, a fog rose again. The moor swallowed paths and muffled the bells of grazing sheep. On that night, 2 travellers strayed from the road. Margaret, an aging midwife returning from a distant farm, and Rob, a Wainwright's apprentice running errands for his master. They should have reached the crossroads by dusk, but the fog moved faster than the sun. Their lantern guttered in the damp, and each step felt heavier than the last. "Keep to the wall," Margaret told him, her calm voice slicing through the haze. "If you can't see your feet, trust the stones." For a while that worked. Then even the wall disappeared. Just as panic began to rise, Rob spotted a faint light ahead. A single square of amber, steady and low. "There!" he whispered. They stumbled toward it, hearts hammering. As they drew near, the fog thinned enough to reveal a cottage crouched against the hillside, its thatch silver with frost. Smoke drifted from the chimney. The door opened before they knocked. A woman stood there, shawl wrapped close, her grey hair coiled neatly at her neck. Her eyes were bright as candle flame. "You took your time," she said gently. "Come in. The fog's greedy tonight." The cottage. Warmth rushed out to meet them. Inside, a peat fire glowed, filling the small room with the scent of wood smoke and wool. On the table waited 2 mugs of steaming tea, as though poured moments before. A loom stood by the window, its frame catching the light like a small wooden cathedral. The threads upon it shimmered, cream, russet, and soft moss green, colours borrowed straight from the moor. Margaret blinked. "We didn't mean to intrude." "You're not intruding," the woman replied. "The moor sends guests when it wishes." She introduced herself as Eleanor. "I weave for the hills," she added with a quiet smile, and gestured to the loom. "Sit, warm your hands. You've walked through half the night already." Rob accepted his tea and felt life return to his fingers. Margaret watched their hostess move about the room, each motion measured and calm, as though she moved in time with some old rhythm the rest of the world had forgotten. "You live alone here?" Margaret asked. Eleanor's eyes flicked toward the lamp in the window. "Not always. Someone I love is out there somewhere. Until he finds his way home, I keep the light." She said it simply, without sorrow, as if she were describing the rising of the moon, the loom. While the wind scratched at the shutters, Eleanor set her shuttle to moving. The threads clicked and whispered like distant rain. Rob watched, transfixed. "Every pattern tells a story," she said. "Some are happy, some sad. But every thread knows where it belongs." Margaret leaned back, lulled by the sound. "And what story are you weaving tonight?" "A road," Eleanor answered. "One that always leads home." They ate oatcakes drizzled with honey. Then Eleanor laid 2 bedrolls near the hearth. "Rest," she said. "I'll keep watch." The fog thickened against the windows, blurring the lamp into a halo. Margaret's eyes closed to the rhythmic hush of the loom. Sometime past midnight she stirred. The shuttle was still. Eleanor sat motionless, palm resting lightly on the threads. She gazed toward the window, where the lamp burned brighter than before, and whispered, "Back so soon?" Her voice held joy, not fear. Margaret shut her eyes again, sensing she was witnessing something sacred, and sleep reclaimed her. The morning. At dawn, a thin sun poured across the hills. The fog had fled to the valleys, leaving the air sharp and clear. Margaret and Rob woke to birdsong, and silence within the house. The hearth was cold, the tea mugs empty. The loom stood finished, its cloth folded neatly over the beam. "Eleanor," Rob called softly. No answer. On the table lay 2 oatcakes, 3 wrapped toffees, and a small ring of grey wool. The lamp had gone dark, yet its brass was warm to the touch. They stepped outside. The gate closed behind them of its own accord, polite as a servant. Frost jewelled the grass, but there were no footprints leading away. Only their own, half erased by the night wind. The lane revealed itself easily now, as if grateful to see them off. By noon, they reached the village. When they told their tale, the inn fell silent. An old shepherd spoke first. "Ah," he said, eyes brightening. "Eleanor, the weaver of the Moor. She's kept the lamp for near 300 years, guides the lost. Some say she waits for her Thomas. Some say she's just too kind to rest. Either way, if you see her light, follow it. It's never led a soul astray." The years between. Time as ever moved on. Margaret grew grey. Rob became a man. Yet both remembered the cottage, its warmth, its calm, the strange certainty that they had brushed against something eternal. Each autumn, when fog rolled down from the heights, Rob would set a lantern in his own window, just as she had done. His neighbours thought it superstition. His wife thought it sweet. He called it gratitude. Decades passed. Rob's daughter, Clara, inherited his clear eyes and steady hands. She loved stories, especially the one about the weaver who wove roads home. On a stormy October evening when Clara was 10, the fog returned, heavy as wool. Rob and his daughter set out to deliver candles to the church. A simple errand, until the lane disappeared beneath their feet. Then, through the mist, a faint light bloomed. Rob stopped dead. The air around him felt suddenly familiar, like a page in a book he had read long ago. "Is that a house?" Clara whispered. "It's something like one," he said, and led her forward. The return. The cottage stood unchanged, slate roof, moss-soft walls, the same west-facing window. A fire glowed within. Rob lifted the latch, and warmth spilled over them like a blessing. Eleanor stood beside her loom, just as before, not a day older. The cloth she wove shimmered faintly, as if the threads remembered starlight. "Back so soon?" she asked, smiling, as though his arrival had been expected all these years. Rob could barely speak. "You remember me?" "Threads never forget the pattern," she replied. Her gaze moved to Clara. "And who is this little one?" "My daughter." Eleanor crouched to meet the girl's eyes. "Ah, then the story continues." She guided Clara's hand to the loom. "Every road is woven from choices," she said. "Hold the thread steady, and it will carry you home." Clara traced the warp in awe. The strands thrummed softly beneath her fingertips, alive with quiet music. Eleanor reached for a small basket on the table and lifted 2 candles bound with twine. "Take these. When the fog forgets the path, light them. One flame reminds another to shine." Rob nodded, throat tight. Thank you, Eleanor, for everything." She smiled. "Keep your lamp trimmed, Rob Weaver of the village. Kindness must be practiced or it fades." When they stepped outside, the fog parted for them as if pushed by unseen hands. Rob looked back only once. The window glowed warmly, but the figure inside was gone. The legend. Years passed, and the story spread like dawn light. Fishermen along the northern coast told of a lamp flickering inland when storms threatened, a signal to head for harbour. Shepherds swore they saw a pale shimmer through the mist and followed it safely home. Children left small skeins of yarn on the church steps in thanks. They called it the Weaver's Light. Some believed the spirit of Eleanor herself tended the flame. Others said the cottage had learned her kindness and continued it out of habit. Whatever the truth, no one doubted the comfort it gave. When fog descended, the people of the Moor lit their own lamps in answer, a constellation of gratitude across the hills. And sometimes, on perfectly clear nights, a traveller might still glimpse a lone candle in that western window, burning for reasons known only to itself. Step closer, and you might smell peat smoke, or hear the faint rhythm of a loom keeping time with the wind. Whether the weaver still keeps watch, or her love simply lingers in the walls, the result is the same. The lost find their bearings, the weary find rest, and the Moor, once a place of fear, has become a map of mercy. Because kindness, practiced long enough, becomes its own sort of haunting. A ghost made of light, carrying tea and warmth instead of sorrow. Tale 2, The Violinist of Prague. There are cities that never truly sleep, not from restlessness, but from memory. Prague is one of them. Its cobblestones remember the tread of kings and poets. Its river keeps the reflection of every candle ever lit along its banks. And when October mist drifts in from the Vltava, those who listen carefully say they can still hear music. A single violin bow whispering through the fog, as though the city itself were drawing breath. That sound, people say, belongs to Marek Vavra, the violinist who played for both the living and the dead. The musician. Marek was born in the mid-17th century, when Prague was a city of spires, bells, and candle smoke. His family lived above a clockmaker's shop, and from their window he could watch the hands of time circle endlessly. He learned early that a violin could mark time just as faithfully, a single note stretching across a heartbeat. He was neither rich nor connected, but music favoured him. By the age of 16 he played in taverns for travellers, earning coins and stories in equal measure. He was known for his quiet intensity, the way his eyes closed, the way his head tilted slightly, as though he were listening to something beyond the room. Some said he could make the violin weep, others that he coaxed ghosts into dancing. Not ghosts, he would say with a smile, just memories trying to hum along. Eventually his talent reached the great concert halls. He was invited to play before nobles and scholars, his music a bridge between joy and melancholy. He called it the language of the in-between, that fragile space where endings and beginnings meet. But it was one autumn, on the eve of All Hallows, that Marek composed the piece that would outlive him. The Requiem of the Living. For weeks passers-by heard his violin at strange hours. candlelight glowed behind his garret window deep into the night. When his friends asked what he was writing, he simply said, "Something to keep the silence company." On the final night of October, the city held a small concert at St. Anne's Hall, a modest stone building near the bridge. The hall filled with the scent of beeswax and damp wool. Outside, the fog rolled thick as milk. Marek was to debut his new composition, Requiem for the Living. He tuned his violin with the precision of a prayer. But as the last audience members arrived, a chill passed through the room, like a breath from the river. Candles flickered. Marek glanced toward the back of the hall, where the door stood slightly ajar. For a moment, he thought he saw a shadow slip inside. Not menacing, just patient, waiting. When he began to play, time bent. The first notes rose like sighs, weaving through the air in long, sorrowful threads. The melody was gentle at first, a lullaby for those who had gone too soon, then deepened into something vast, as if the violin itself grieved for the entire world. Those who were there would later say that they stopped breathing, afraid to disturb the air. The candle flame swayed in rhythm with the bough. The fog outside pressed its face to the windows, like a curious child. Halfway through, Marek's expression changed. He tilted his head as if hearing an echo, a second violin, faint and distant, answering his call. But there was none. His bow trembled once, drew a final perfect note, and fell still. When the audience rose to applaud, they realized he was slumped forward, eyes closed, a faint smile on his lips. The violin rested gently against his chest. He had left them with music still hanging in the air, and no more breath to claim it. The years after, St. Anne's Hall closed for a time after that night. The church bells tolled for him, and the city wept in its quiet, dignified way. But as seasons turned, stories began to ripple through the cobbled streets. Each year, on the eve of All Hallows, people passing near the river swore they heard faint violin strains drifting through the fog. The same melody, soft and sorrowful, as if time itself were practicing remembrance. Some said it was the wind threading through window cracks. Others said the river's song. But one autumn, a century later, a student of music named Lenka Dvorak heard it for herself. She was walking home through the square after rehearsal when a familiar sequence of notes floated toward her, fragile, perfect. She followed the sound through the twisting lanes until she reached the old St. Anne's Hall, shuttered now and overgrown with ivy. Yet light spilled faintly through a cracked window, golden and pulsing in time with the melody. Drawn by wonder rather than fear, she pushed open the door. The air smelled of dust and candle wax. On the small stage, surrounded by empty benches, stood a figure. He was half in shadow, his back turned. The bow moved slow and sure, drawing that same impossibly tender line of sound. For a moment, Lenka simply listened, tears warming her face. When she blinked, the figure was gone, leaving only a single sheet of music on the stand. She approached it with shaking hands. The page was yellowed, the ink faded, yet the title at the top was clear: Requiem for the Living. She carried it home as if it were something alive. The return of the music. Lenka copied the score by hand and shared it with her teacher, who dismissed it as a romantic fantasy. "Ghosts don't write sheet music," he said. But when she played it for him, The room itself seemed to lean closer. The melody wound like a prayer, grief and gratitude braided together. When the final note fell, even the skeptical professor sat in silence. Word spread. The piece was performed publicly that winter, with Lenker at first violin. The audience wept openly, though none could say why. The music carried no darkness, only the ache of something remembered. As the last note faded, a chill passed through the hall. The chandelier crystals trembled, and one candle guttered out, though no draught had touched it. Lenker looked up to the balcony and thought she saw a faint silhouette. A man with a violin tucked beneath his chin, smiling. After the performance, the sheet of music vanished. No one could explain it, but every musician who had touched it remembered the notes perfectly, as though they had always known them. The whisper in the fog. Decades later, during the Second World War, when Prague's streets darkened under occupation and curfews, people again heard music. This time, soldiers reported it. A slow violin lament wandering through the misty alleys near the bridge. No one could find the source. The melody never changed. It was always requiem for the living. Some said it was a protest made of beauty, too quiet to be silenced. Others swore that whenever the song drifted near, air raid sirens missed their mark, and people found safety they should not have found. Whether or not that was true, hope took its shape from sound. In later years, when peace returned, the city restored St. Anne's Hall. It reopened as a modest concert space, and on its dedication night, a young violinist named Thomas, a descendant of Lenker's family, chose to perform Marek Wawra's Lost Piece. As he played the final movement, a warm wind rose inside the hall, though the windows were closed. The candle flames bent toward the stage, as if bowing. And when the last note trembled into silence, a soft echo answered. One bow stroke later, from nowhere and everywhere at once. Thomas lowered his violin slowly. The audience said he looked not frightened, but profoundly peaceful. He told them afterward, it felt like someone was playing with me, someone who knew exactly what came next. The gentle haunting. Now, on misty autumn nights, tourists walking along the river sometimes stop mid-stride, heads tilted. They think they hear music, faint as breath, gliding between the bells and the flowing water. Those who know the legend smile and whisper, Marek's practicing again. In one cafe near the bridge, an old poster hangs, a sketch of a violinist's silhouette beside the words, Requiem for the Living, first performed 1773. The paper is brittle, but every All Hallows' Eve, the owner finds a fresh white rose laid beneath the frame. No one ever sees who leaves it. Sometimes, when fog gathers thick around the Charles Bridge, a single candle appears at the far end, not on a table or a windowsill, but floating just above the stone, as if resting on a ripple of air. Those who approach too quickly find it gone. Those who walk slowly hear the faintest line of music as it fades. The meaning of the melody. People have argued for centuries what Marek's Requiem means. Some call it a love song for the world. Others say it is grief distilled into beauty. But those who have truly listened know better. It is a conversation between presence and absence, between what remains and what drifts away. It teaches that loss and love are not opposites, but partners, dancing to the same rhythm in different rooms. Perhaps that is why his ghost never frightens. He plays not to haunt, but to accompany, guiding those who walk alone through the fog, reminding them that they are not as solitary as they believe. The last note. If you ever visit Prague near Halloween, stand on the bridge just after midnight. The city will be hushed except for the soft lap of the river and the heartbeat sound of your own pulse. Wait, let your breathing slow. And maybe, if the air is damp and the candles along the quay tremble, you will hear it. A violin, distant but clear, bow drawing a line of light through the mist. Do not be afraid. That sound is older than sorrow and gentler than sleep. It belongs to a man who believed music could knit the living and the dead into harmony, and who, in some quiet way, still does. And if you listen long enough, the melody might change. It might echo the rhythm of your own breath, the timbre of your own heart, as though the violin has found you in the crowd and chosen to play for you alone. When it fades, leave a candle on the riverbank. Someone will see it. Someone always does. Because every city needs its guardians, and every soul, living or gone, deserves to be remembered in song. Tale 3, The Candle in the Chapel. High in the hills of Normandy, there lies a forgotten chapel that once belonged to a convent long dissolved. Its walls were built of pale limestone that blushes pink at sunset, and its bell tower leans like a weary pilgrim. For nearly a century it stood abandoned, ivy threading its doorways, birds nesting where saints once gazed from painted glass. But every October, when the nights grow longest, travellers passing along the valley road see a faint golden glow inside those ruined walls. A single candle burning on the altar, untouched by wind or rain. The village of Virilac. Below that hill sits the little village of Virilac, hemmed by orchards and cobblestone lanes. The people there are sensible folk. They prune their apple trees on the same days their grandparents did, speak to their neighbours before the weather, and thank the saints for the taste of good cider. They don't frighten easily, yet even they cross themselves when the candle appears. No one admits to lighting it. The road is steep and tangled. No shepherd nor pilgrim has cause to climb it. And yet, every year as the leaves turn to bronze, the flame returns, small, unwavering, and patient. One such October, the mystery became the quiet concern of Lucy Moreau, the gardener at the manor on the edge of town. Lucy was not a woman given to superstition. She trusted her hands more than her prayers. They were strong, soil-stained hands that coaxed roses from clay and lavender from stony earth. But she had also learned that the land keeps its own secrets, and that some questions, if ignored too long, begin to whisper. On a rainy evening, walking home from the orchard with her shawl pulled tight, she saw it, that lonely candle gleaming through the trees. The sight stopped her mid-step. It wasn't a flicker like lightning or fireflies. It was steady, as if some invisible hand cupped it from the wind. The next night it burned again, and the next. By the fourth evening, Lucy could no longer content herself with guessing. She packed a lantern, a loaf of bread, and the sturdy kind of courage that grows quietly in those who spend their lives tending to small living things. And she began to climb. The chapel on the hill. The path to the chapel twisted through chestnut trees, shedding their last leaves. Moss covered the stones like green velvet, and the air smelled of rain and wood smoke from the village below. When Lucy reached the old gate, she found it hanging open, one hinge long since rusted away. The chapel door leaned from its frame, its iron lock orange with age. Yet inside, the air was strangely still. The candle was real. It burned upon the crumbling altar, its brass holder polished bright, the wax running neatly down its side. Around it lay fragments of a vanished world, half-collapsed pews, a marble font filled with rainwater, the faintest traces of painted stars on the ceiling beams. Lucy stepped closer. The candle's flame did not waver. Its light cast a warm circle on the stone floor. And within that circle, the chapel seemed younger somehow, as though the years fell away wherever it shone. Someone, she thought, must be tending this. The wick was freshly trimmed, the wax clean and new. Beside it rested a small linen pouch containing a flint and 2 more tapers. Whoever kept the candle alive meant it to stay that way. Lucy stood in the quiet for a long time listening. The chapel's silence was not empty. It felt watchful, attentive, like the hush that falls after a lullaby. When thunder grumbled in the distance, she turned to leave. But before she crossed the threshold, she whispered, "I'll come back tomorrow. You shouldn't be alone." The keeper of the flame. She did come back, the next evening and the one after that. Each time the candle was already lit, the flame steady as a heartbeat. Lucy began bringing small gifts, a bit of fresh wax, a brass cloth to polish the holder, wild flowers tucked into an old tin cup. On her 5th visit, she was not alone. As she knelt to clean away cobwebs from the altar rail, a soft voice spoke behind her. "Merci." Lucy froze. Then slowly, she turned. A woman stood in the aisle, her habit grey with age, her face calm and pale as linen. She might have stepped from a painting, yet the air did not stir, and her feet left no print on the dusty stones. Lucy's first thought was to flee, her second to stay. The gentleness in the stranger's eyes held her fast. "You've been keeping the candle," Lucy said quietly. The woman inclined her head, "As I have always done. Until the house is whole again, I cannot rest." Her voice was warm, human, touched by fatigue but not sadness. Lucy set her cloth aside. "You were one of the sisters here." "I was the last," said the apparition, "Sir Thérèse of Saint-Colombe. When the storm tore the roof away and the order scattered, I remained to guard the relics. They were moved to the church below, but this—" She looked around the crumbling walls. "This was still my home. I could not let its light go out." She turned her gaze to the candle. "I keep it burning, so that heaven will not forget this place exists." Lucy, who had never thought much of heaven one way or another, nodded. "Then we'll see it remembered properly. You shouldn't have to keep watch alone." The sister's faint smile deepened. "No one keeps watch alone, child. They only think they do. The work of repair." The next morning Lucy went to Père Aubert, the old priest of Virillac, whose beard was as white as communion bread. She told him everything, not the part about the ghost, but the part about the chapel, the candle, and the ruin it had become. He sighed long and low. "Saint-Colombe," he murmured. "I remember being baptized there. My mother said its bell could be heard clear to Rouen. I thought it lost." "Then let's find it again," Lucy said simply. The priest gave her the heavy iron key to the chapel gate. "I can offer prayers and permission," he said, "but not labour. The rest, ma fille, is up to you." And so the work began. Lucy enlisted Etienne, the village mason, who still knew how to read the moods of stone. She found a few apprentices willing to trade a Saturday's time for cider and bread. Children came with broomsticks taller than themselves. Even the mayor, reluctant to be left out of something miraculous, donated a cartload of tiles. They cleared ivy, patched holes, and set the bell cradle straight. The hill that had been silent for decades now echoed with laughter and hammer blows. And through it all, every night without fail, the candle burned. Sometimes, when Lucy arrived late, she thought she glimpsed the sister kneeling near the altar, not praying exactly, but watching the builders as though keeping count of each good deed. And the last stitch. By December, the chapel had a new roof and a modest bell. The villagers planned a small service for Christmas Eve, a rededication to mark the return of light. On the afternoon before, Lucy climbed the hill to make one final inspection. Snow powdered the fields below, and smoke curled lazily from cottage chimneys. Inside the chapel, the air was cold but clean. The candle burned brighter than ever. Beside it stood Sister Thérèse. "You've done well," she said, her voice almost a whisper. "The house remembers itself." Lucy smiled, though her throat ached. "You can rest now." "Almost," said the sister. "There remains one stitch to close the seam." She turned her eyes to the great wooden door that still hung open, its latch broken. "We have let everything in," she said softly. "Now we must also learn to close." Lucy understood. That evening she brought Etienne, who repaired the latch and fitted a new bolt. When he finished, he nodded toward the candle. "Do we snuff it out for the night?" Lucy looked to the sister, but the aisle was empty. "No," she said, "let it burn." The rededication. Christmas Eve came cold and clear. The villagers climbed the hill in a ribbon of lantern light, their boots crunching frost. Père Aubert, frail but radiant, led them inside. The bell rang once, clear, high, and joyful. Children gasped. Men who had built the roof wiped their eyes without shame. On the altar, the candle blazed steadily. The brass gleamed, polished to gold. Lucy stood near the front, her hands clasped. She felt warmth on her cheek, not from the flame, but from something standing close beside her. She turned slightly and saw, just for an instant, Sister Thérèse smiling through the glow. "Merci," the sister said softly. "You have mended what I could not." Lucy reached out, but the space beside her was filled only with candlelight. The flame bowed once, flickered, and steadied again. The candles rest. When morning came, the candle was gone. In its place lay the brass holder, empty but faintly warm. Lucy took it to the sacristy of Saint-Martin's church, where Père Aubert placed it on the altar as a relic of gratitude. The villagers kept St. Colombe open after that. Weddings were held there, christenings, harvest blessings. Some nights the wind would pass through the rafters, and the candles would flare without reason, as though applauding. Lucy tended the chapel garden each spring until her hair turned silver. and on the anniversaries of that Christmas Eve, she often climbed the hill alone. She never saw Sœur Thérèse again, but sometimes as dusk fell, she felt a flicker of warmth behind her, like a candle greeting its keeper. And when Lucy died many years later, a strange thing was noticed. On the night of her funeral, as the priest locked the chapel after evening prayers, a single flame appeared upon the altar once more, bright, steady, and kind. No one dared blow it out. The next morning, it was gone. But from then on, whenever storms rattled the valley and travellers lost their way, villagers would look toward the hill. And there, in the chapel of Saint-Colombe, a single candle glowed through the rain, not as a warning, but as a welcome. A reminder that some lights are kept not by hands or breath, but by love itself. And love, once lit, is very hard to put out. Tale 4. The Lantern on the Docks. Along the cold coast of Maine, the sea keeps its own hours. In the harbour of Breakwater Cove, time is measured not by clocks, but by tides, gull cries, and a single light that burns through every storm. The lantern on the docks. The people there say it belongs to Nora Glynn, the fisherman's wife, who still keeps watch long after her body was claimed by the sea. The keeper of the light. Nora's cottage stood above the wharf, its shutters forever smelling of salt and lemon oil. Her husband Dan captained a small red dory and believed he could smell a storm a day ahead. He was wrong once. One October night, a nor'easter shouldered down from the north, roaring louder than church bells. Nora waited at the end of the pier, shawl whipped against her, lantern held high. The wind tore her prayers to pieces. When dawn came, every boat limped home but Dan's. The town did its kindest best, bread at her door, soft words, promises of search parties. But grief that deep cannot be comforted, only tended. So Nora tended it the way she knew, with light. Every evening she carried her lantern to the last piling on the dock and kept it burning until dawn. She said little. She only watched the horizon. At first people pitied her. Then, gradually, they began to steer by her glow. Captains used it to find the channel when the fog was mean. Fishermen touched their caps to it before setting sail. Even the lighthouse keeper, Amos Pike, said her lamp steadied his own on the worst nights. "She's not calling him home," Amos once told a neighbour. "She's making sure the rest of us don't get lost looking for him." And so the lamp became part of the harbour's rhythm. The final light set each evening, the last to go out at dawn. The lantern's legacy. Years passed. Nora's hair silvered. Her knees learned the ache of weather. Still she climbed the hill each dusk, lantern in hand. When she died one March morning, they found her sitting at her post, back to the piling, lamp still burning beside her. The lighthouse keeper trimmed the wick, topped the oil, and kept it lit in her honour. But the next night, before anyone reached the dock, the lantern was already glowing. No flame visible through the glass, only light as if it remembered its own task. After that, the townsfolk stopped pretending it was only memory. The children called it the Lady's Lantern. Sailors swore they saw a figure in the mist. A woman with her shawl tucked close, head bent, lamp angled low against the wind. When tempests threatened, her light brightened as if to defy them. The harbour came to trust it. If the lantern leaned east, ships hugged the eastern wall. If it flickered and steadied, men knew the tide had turned. No one ever tried to snuff it out or catch her watching. You don't trap what keeps you safe. Jonas and the Storm. One late October evening, decades later, a boy named Jonas Kittredge was running errands on the wharf when the weather changed. The air turned metallic, the clouds bruised purple, and the wind arrived howling. Bells clanged, ropes snapped, and the sea began climbing the pier like a thief. Amos Pike, still the keeper, lit the lighthouse early and sent Jonas running word. Bring them in. Big blow coming. By dusk, boats staggered through foam. Jonas's mother boiled chowder for the soaked and swore she'd tie her boy to the stove if he set 1 foot outside again. But when a horn's thin cry cut through the gale, he looked down the hill and saw the lantern on the dock. Steady, bright, leaning into the storm as though pointing. "There's a boat out there," he said. Mrs. Kittredge cursed softly, but grabbed her shawl. Together they reached the pier, rain slashing sideways. Out in the grey chaos, a small sloop pitched wildly, its mast half splintered. 2 men clung to the tiller, fighting for shore. "Starboard!" Jonas shouted, waving his arms, though he doubted they could see him. Then, as if answering, the lantern's flame flared, not with heat, but with purpose. Its glow widened, spreading a golden path over the churning water. The sailors turned toward it. The sea struck once, twice, and then relented, as though a hand had brushed the wave aside. The boat scraped against the dock, battered but alive. Strong arms pulled the men in. One of them, shaking, crossed himself and whispered, "We followed her light." When the storm finally rolled off into darkness, Jonas walked to the lantern. It burned softly now, calm as a heartbeat. He touched the railing, sea-cold beneath his hand. "Thank you," he said. The flame dipped once, like a nod. The Keeper's Worry. In the quiet days that followed, Amos Pike fretted. The lighthouse had its budget, but the dock lamp did not. Oil cost coin, glass cracked, metal rusted. Ghosts don't keep accounts. So he placed a small tin by the chandlery door with a note, "For the lady's light." The town filled it without being asked. Coins, wicks, even a pane of glass left anonymously. Children carried fresh oil down the hill like offerings. And so, the lantern remained tended by many hands, living ones. Amos sometimes thought he saw her beside it, a soft shape of grey, shawl fluttering, hair like sea foam. He never spoke of it loudly. Some things you thank quietly, or not at all. Ugh. The winter without colour. Years later came a hard winter. The fish thinned, fever walked the coast, and Amos's breath began to fail him. Still he climbed the lighthouse stairs each dusk until his heart said enough. He was buried beside Nora on the hill that faces the sea. 2 lights at rest. That week the harbour went dark. The new keeper was delayed by the storm. The lighthouse lamp stayed cold. Yet at midnight a glow rose from the dock. The lady's lantern, brighter than anyone had seen it. Its light reached halfway across the harbour, golden on the black water. Jonas, now grown, saw it from his window and hurried down. The pier was empty but for the lamp, its flame dancing steady in the windless air. He stood a long time, hat in hand, feeling the strange comfort of being watched over by something unseen. When he finally turned back toward town, he whispered, "Good night, Amos." "Good night, Nora." Behind him, The lantern flickered once, then settled into its patient glow. The years that followed, the light never failed again. Seasons rolled like waves, new ships, new families, new names carved on the churchyard stones. But the lady's lantern remained. On calm nights it burned softly. During storms it blazed. Some said she appeared only when lives were in danger. Others believed she shone simply out of habit, because love, once practiced long enough, becomes its own kind of weather. Children were taught to tip their caps to the light. Couples carved initials into the rail beside it. And every sailor, before casting off, looked for that small, steady flame and took courage from its glow. Jonas grew old tending the docks. He kept the lamp polished and the wick trimmed, though it never truly needed either. When asked why he still bothered, he smiled. "Respect," he'd say. "The living ought to do their part." The lantern's promise. Time softened the edges of the story as sea air does to wood. Tourists called it superstition. Scholars said reflected light. But the townsfolk of Breakwater Cove know better. On nights when fog swallows the shore, and even the lighthouse seems to lose its bearings, they see that single flame gleaming through the grey, a humble circle of gold that says, "Here is home." If you ever visit that harbour near Halloween, walk down to the last dock after sunset. The sea will murmur beneath you, and the air will taste of salt and wood smoke. Look toward the end of the pier, and you may see a figure, small, shawled, calm, setting her lantern against the wind. Do not be afraid. The Lady of the Docks does not haunt. She helps. Her light is for all who've lost their way, on water or on land. Watch a little while, until the glow steadies your breathing. Then turn back toward the village, for that's what her light has always meant to do. Guide the living safely home. Tale 5, The Whispering Library. There's a kind of quiet that belongs only to libraries. It isn't silence. Books are too alive for that. It's more like a soft breathing, as if every page were dreaming. In the New England town of Greyhaven, where winters come early and porches go creaky with salt air, the old public library kept that breathing steady for more than a century. Its brick walls were soot-darkened, its steps worn into a shallow smile, and its green-shaded lamps cast circles of light that looked like invitations. People called it Harrington Library, after the mill owner who built it in 1892. But locals had another name, Evelyn's House. That was for Evelyn Hart, the librarian who spent her entire adult life in that building, keeping its lights low and its welcome warm. Evelyn and the Ledger. Evelyn came to the job in 1903, a shy 22-year-old who valued both quiet and company, the kind you find when hands share a table and eyes share a page. She had gentle wrists, steady eyes, and the patience to mend a binding so neatly you'd never know it had come apart. If a child asked for a book about whales, she found one that smelled faintly of salt. If a fisherman asked for a newspaper from 3 years back, she knew which drawer had the right day. When she checked a book out, she added a note to a private ledger, not just the title and borrower, but a little line about why she thought the book had chosen the reader. She walked to the library each morning, rain or shine, with a sandwich folded in wax paper and a thermos of tea. At the front desk, she kept a small tin of seed for the sparrows who hopped along the sill. and a spool of thread for emergencies, buttons and bindings alike. In winter, she wound the clock and tapped the radiator until it remembered its duty. In summer, she turned the fan on low so papers wouldn't try to fly. She believed in all the small household arts that keep a public place feeling like a home. The town believed in her. Children grew into parents and brought their own children back to her desk. Sailors on leave read the shipping news beneath her green lamps and softened their voices without being told. The mayor once joked that she was the only person in Greyhaven who could hush a thunderstorm. And so the decades folded themselves quiet as quilts. When Evelyn turned 60, the library's board gave her a brass bell. To summon help, they said. She put it on the checkout desk and never rang it. When she turned 70, they offered a pension and a goodbye cake. She smiled, sliced the cake, and then set about reshelving the returns. After the harvest, she said. She meant autumn. By then the children would need their school books, and change, like winter, could wait its turn. The day after, one October afternoon, the wind shifted and the leaves raced each other along the gutters. Evelyn shelved a final book, the new edition of Birds of the Atlantic Coast, and sat to write a note, reminding herself to oil the door on the biography room. The note remained on the blotter. Evelyn's pen rolled into the blotter's groove and stayed there. The clock ticked, the lamps hummed, and in the quiet between 1 hour and the next, Evelyn Hart's heart laid down its work. They found her at dusk, perfectly neat, a slip of paper beneath her hand that read, "Remember to label the new donation from Miss Wood. Sea stories, good for winter." The town mourned as towns do. Someone tucked a sprig of rosemary beneath the bell. Children left drawings on the step. Former sailors stood on the walk with hats in hand, and the mayor cried without disguise. They buried her on a hill that could just see the library roof. "Rest well," said the minister. "Rest easy," said the wind across the pages. They hired a new head librarian, Miss Cora Winslow, brisk, capable, kind in her own brisk way. She kept hours properly and put a bowl of peppermints on the desk. She did not use the brass bell. The first whisper came 3 nights later. The whispers! It was the janitor, Tom Larrabee, sweeping after closing. He heard it first, a sound like someone turning a page in the next room, then a second, then the softest murmur, vowels half-shaped. He thought he'd left a patron in the reading room. He checked. Empty. When he returned to the main hall, the air had that pleasant, papery scent books give off when they're content. Another brush of sound. Pages. A whisper that might have been, "There you are." Tom stood very still. "Miss Hart?" he said, and felt foolish. The whisper calmed, like a kettle settling off the boil. He went home and told no one. But the whispers continued. Children reading after school felt a hush pass by like a friendly hand. A widow leafing through recipe magazines found a clippings folder at her elbow she hadn't brought in. Mr. Holt, who read poetry only when no one was watching, discovered a slim volume open to a page with a line circled in faint pencil. What the heart has once known, it shall never forget. He looked up sharply. No one was there. He took the book home and read it by the kitchen light, and for the first time since the accident, he slept. Miss Winslow felt it too, the subtle presence that kept the lamps from flickering and the newspapers from sliding to the floor. She worked by an old heating grate, and often heard, when she was tired, a soft hum there. a tune Evelyn used to hum when she thought no one could hear. The cadence of the alphabet, slow and soothing as tidewater. Once, when she misplaced a patron's address card, she found it waiting, tucked under the brass bell. People begin to speak of it quietly, the way you speak of weather or health. The library was still Evelyn's house. If a child coughed, a glass of water seemed always to be near. If a student needed a book that had inexplicably gone missing, it arrived in a stack an hour later, spine uncracked. It wasn't spooky. It was benevolent. The sort of haunting done by someone who didn't know how to stop helping. The hidden room. Every building keeps a secret. Harrington Library's secret lay behind the biography wall. The shelves there ran floor to ceiling, oak dark as molasses, each case fitted with a ladder rail. But one case didn't quite meet the wall. Its baseboard wasn't nailed, only wedged. Evelyn had known. She dusted there last. When, in the summer of 1928, the town voted to wire the building for better lights, the workmen discovered that looseness. "Odd," said the foreman, tapping the wood. "Hollow." He called Miss Winslow. Together they eased the case outward and found, behind it, a narrow door with a simple latch. It opened on a small room with a single high window and a bench under it, like a child's idea of a secret place. Inside were boxes, 37 tied with blue twine. On each lid, in neat handwriting, a label: Harvest 1903, Winter 1911, Spring 1918. Years ranged like stacked spines. Miss Winslow lifted the lid of the nearest. Not records of budgets, not accession lists, journals, dozens upon dozens of them. Story after story in Evelyn's tidy hand. Not fiction, but true accounts of townspeople's lives as they had offered them unwittingly across her desk. Not gossip, not one unkind word. Just the sort of details life uses to make itself real. Mrs. Bedford's son out at sea found a book on knots to fold into his letters. Young Clara reads under the table for fear of brothers who call her soft. Gave her Alcott. She glowed. Mr. Holt brought back Leaves of Grass with a pressed wildflower. Still does not say her name. Left with In Memoriam. Each entry ended with a quiet wish. Let him sleep. Let her be brave. Let this help. Some entries were simply lists. Coal delivered to Number. 7 while he worked nights. Tea sent to Miss Wood. Throat. Label maps before the children arrive. The secret room held 25 years of one woman's devotion. A map of a town made not of streets, but of care. Miss Winslow sat on the bench with a box in her lap and understood the whispers. They were a librarian's after-voice, the habit of a life still tidying the edges. She closed the lid gently and stayed into the room. "We'll keep them safe." When she came out, the male workers had the decent look of men who reverse themselves. "Ma'am," said the foreman, "if you want that wall to stay private, we'll frame the case and hinge it proper. Seems to me the lady who wrote those didn't mind a secret." "Thank you," Miss Winslow said, and went to her desk to order acid-free paper and a lock, reading aloud. "You cannot keep a gift in a dark room forever." It was Miss Winslow's idea to let the journals do what they wanted all along, be read. Not publicly, the entries were personal, but aloud, with names removed, like prayers. She began in autumn. The lamps shone soft, the clock whispered along. Children sprawled on rugs, and Miss Winslow read small true stories to the room. Of kindness left at doors, of letters written to ships, of a shy boy who discovered maps and found the courage to leave, of a widow who returned a book about gardens and planted an orchard instead. She chose 3 each week, the way a baker chooses loaves for market, with care for freshness and hunger both. Between each story she paused, as if listening for a page to turn itself. Sometimes, very faintly, it did. The town changed a little. People brought their own stories to trade for the ones they heard. Donations increased not in money, but in belonging. A jar of buttons for mending bindings, a pair of reading glasses left for whoever needs them, a gently used baby pram to roll the big dictionaries. Teenagers volunteered to carry baskets to the older patrons. Fishermen left papers at the door for the boys who collected clippings. The journals became a quiet covenant. We will keep one another remembered. And the whispers eased, not gone, only gentler, like breathing after a long walk. The lamps flickered less. The newspapers stayed put. Miss Winslow came to believe Evelyn was satisfied. The storm night. But ghosts, kind ones even, are stubborn when it matters. The night it mattered most, winter was throwing itself against the windows, hard enough to rattle the leaded glass. The last family in the building was the Duns, mother, father, and a little girl named Mabel with a woolen hat pulled down over her eyebrows. Mabel adored the library with the whole gravity of 8 years old. It had been a hard season for the Duns, work scarce, coal dear, and they had stayed late in the warm to stretch their courage. When the lights flickered once, twice, then failed, Miss Winslow brought out oil lamps and apologized to no one in particular. "We'll close early," she told the Duns, but the wind groaned disagreement and pushed snow hard into the street. Mr. Dunn looked at the white blur outside, then at his daughter's red hands. "We'll wait," he said. They waited in the main hall, lamps pooled like islands. Mabel wandered to the biography wall and laid her palm against the gap that wasn't there anymore. "It feels like something is behind it," she said matter-of-factly. Miss Winslow thought of the journals, the careful twine. "There are stories behind almost everything," she said. "Some are just sleeping." The wind surged. Somewhere a branch gave up. The door stuttered in its frame. Miss Winslow walked to it, set the deadbolt, and then turned back toward the lamps. The whisper came clear, as if a woman with good lungs were speaking down the stairs. "Children to the desk." Miss Winslow did not question it. "Here," she said calmly, and lifted Mabel onto the counter. The child's wool hat brushed the brass bell. Mr. Dunn and his wife moved in close. The room, which had seemed too large for 4 people, felt now like a hearth, with the walls pulled wide. The lamps burned brighter, though no one trimmed them. The wind shouted and then forgot its words. They stayed there an hour, 2, long enough for the snowplow to dig a path, and for a neighbour with a rope on his waist to come clap at the door. "We'll see you home," he called. Miss Winslow nodded, helped Mabel into her coat, and then did something she had never done. She lifted the brass bell and rang it once. Clear, bright, "Thank you." The whisper that answered was not a voice so much as warmth. A settling, a small contentment that ran the length of the room like a cat returning to its chair. Miss Winslow turned down the lamps and locked the door. Outside, the snow felt like a clean sheet on a made bed. The bequest. Spring came with its strange New England habit of forgetting to be warm. The board met to discuss budgets and bulbs. Miss Winslow arrived with a simple proposal: a reading fund in Evelyn's name, to purchase titles anyone in town requested. No questions, no forms. She kept us supplied with the right words at the right time, Miss Winslow said, placing one of the journals on the table. I think we should keep doing that. They agreed, moved and somewhat embarrassed to be so. The newspapers published a small notice: in memory of Miss Evelyn Hart, a fund for the finding of needed books. Donations came from the careful and the careless alike. Nickels in a jar. A $10 bill folded into an envelope with no return address. A check from a woman who had moved to Chicago in 1907 and still remembered the taste of peppermint in her mouth as she read by a green lamp. The first book purchased from the fund, by Mabel Dunn at age 9, was The Secret Garden. Miss Winslow wrote on its first page, "For Mabel, and for all closed doors that will someday open." When Mabel returned it, months later, she brought a packet of seeds for the library's flower box. Calendula, small suns, the last whisper. Years stack themselves until the weight of them surprises you. Miss Winslow's hair greyed. Mabel grew into a young woman, and then a nurse, steady-handed and quick to laugh. The Dunn's fortunes improved. The library's carpets wore through in a path from the front desk to the children's alcove. The journals slept behind the hinged case, visited often, never paraded. The whispers diminished until most people forgot to notice. The way you forget to notice your own breathing. Then one evening, as Miss Winslow balanced the ledger by lamplight, she heard, very close, the softest sound, the brass bell tipping against its stand. She looked up. The room felt friendly and full, the way a kitchen feels after guests have left, and their conversation has settled into the cupboards. A green shade buzzed and stilled. A sparrow pecked at the sill. "Thank you," she said aloud, not because she expected an answer, but because gratitude prefers not to be hoarded. Something warm brushed her sleeve, a draught, a memory, a blessing, who can say, and passed on toward the shelves. The building breathed. The clock, after a stubborn pause, ticked. Miss Winslow closed the ledger and turned down the lights. On her way out, she paused by the biography wall and laid her palm flat against the wood. "We'll keep reading," she promised, "and we'll keep each other." Behind the panel, the journals didn't stir. They didn't need to. They had at last been read. If you visit, if you ever find yourself in Greyhaven on a fall evening when rain beads the windows like commas, step into the old library. The lamps will be lit just high enough. The clock will be ticking its calm sentence. Sit at a table and open any book. Feel how the room grows kinder around you, as if someone had been expecting you for years and had already set a place. You might hear a whisper of pages turning in a room you can't quite see. You might feel your hand rest on exactly the passage you needed before you knew to ask for it. You might glance toward the front desk and imagine a modest woman with steady eyes lifting her head, already knowing which book will walk home with you and why. No need to be afraid. Some ghosts shelve themselves as carefully as volumes and keep watch the same way they always did, by making sure everyone finds a story that fits in their pocket. And if, as you leave, you touch the brass bell and it gives the faintest answering ring, don't be startled. That is only the house saying what Evelyn always said when the door closed behind a reader. And so, dear listener, our long candle burns low. We have travelled far together tonight, across moors and mist, through chapels and storm-tossed harbours, beneath the soft lamps of libraries that never truly sleep. We've met the weaver who wove warmth into the dark, the violinist whose song stitched sorrow to peace, the sister who lit candles until her chapel remembered itself, the widow whose lantern guided lost sailors home, and the librarian who kept stories breathing long after her own breath had stilled. Each ghost we met was gentle, not haunting for vengeance, but for love. They lingered not to frighten, but to remind that kindness, duty, and memory have roots deeper than death, that every act of care, a lamp lit, a melody played, a story shared, leaves behind a little warmth for someone else to find in the cold. If you think on it, perhaps the world is full of such lights. A porch lamp left on for someone late returning. A song sung softly to an empty room. A library book pressed into another hand with the words, "You'll like this." They are the everyday hauntings of love. Proof that our gentlest actions echo longer than we imagine. So, as the last ember glows and the fire sighs itself to sleep, take this night's lesson with you. Ghosts are simply stories we have loved too much to let go. And stories, like candles, are meant to be passed from one hand to another. If tonight's tales kept you company, know that more wait beyond the horizon, whispered by firelight, waiting for another quiet evening when the wind rattles the shutters, and the world feels just between dreaming and waking. If you'd like to help keep that lantern burning here at Holiday History, you can join our Patreon, where kindred spirits gather for early access to stories, ad-free nights, and the chance to choose which legends flicker to life next. Now close your eyes, dear listener. The ghosts are at rest, and the night keeps watch. Wherever you are, may your path be well lit, your home warm, and your heart open to the quiet voices that still wander kindly through the dark. Until next time, sleep well and keep the candle burning.